Good morning, or whatever time it is. Hello, Rev Walt. You're here, and I love your question. Your question is the right place to start in so many ways. So you say, look, let's see, you say, I think cults use morality as a prop, but it makes me wonder why they use this over something else. Okay, so that's just that starts me where I want to start. I just looked up while I was waiting for the time to come on. I just looked up the word rev, reverend, the etymology of it, and it means to be re-alerted to something. That's where it comes from. It means to be revered, of course, by the time we get to Walt. But and yeah, I love the irony of it. But what to attend to and what's moral are really interesting questions. Good morning, Shirley. Great to see you. Thank you for thanking me on all my videos. I don't get that much audience, and from what I understand, uh, comments really help. So I'm grateful for that, and much more than that, I'm grateful for your attention uh, uh, to these ideas that interest me. Okay, so we start with Rev's question, which is why do they use morality when they could use something else? Well, what is morality? Well, it's thinking about what's good versus bad. Though I would argue that literally speaking, there's no such thing as good or bad. There's only better or worse. And remember that in this work I'm doing, I'm trying to explain everything from its origins. I'm trying to explain how change changes such that we would exist. My assumption, which is, I think you could say, taken on board by all scientists, is that the universe has been around for something like 14 billion years, and for the first 10 billion years in this neck of the woods, there hasn't been stuff like us. Apparently, there could be stuff like us because here we are. Um, Nothing we do defies the laws of physics or chemistry, but uh, we were very unlikely, and now we're more likely. We've made all sorts of other things unlikely, and that's why we exist. That is, I prevent my own death. A lot of the work I do is based on this fundamental assumption that what's presented is a product of what's prevented. I'm preventing my own death. Whereas chemistry by itself is not actively preventing anything. But believe it or not, I'm actually, hey, Jeff, good to see you, man. But I'm trying to explain how you'd ever get better or worse in a universe that for the first 10 billion years didn't have any better or worse. There just was what there was. Now you could talk about what happens before the Big Bang, even though supposedly many speculate that time didn't exist, so there is no before the Big Bang. Um, that's beyond my generation. From my perspective, I think it's a fine time to be speculating about that, but I'm taking the universe as we know it. My generation, people alive today, are, I think, in a position where we can speculate about how better or worse emerge from, from the chemistry that precedes it. And it doesn't begin with morality. It begins with better or worse for an organism that is struggling for its own existence. So, better or worse starts out as selfishness, you could say, or selfish like bluish, meaning kind of selfish. Yeah, there's, in general, organisms struggling for their own existence are looking out for them and theirs. That is, the lineages that follow, the lineage that they're part of, biological reproductive success. I got to explain all of that. And from it, I get this idea about what's better or worse. And I'm following some of the notions, not all of them. I disagree with plenty of them, of a guy named Charles Sanders Peirce, who points out that logic is actually a subset of aesthetics. That is, even if I'm just trying to be as neutral as possible and get my own will out of the way, when I talk about a better or worse theory, I'm talking a kind of aesthetics. What he calls aesthetics, we now call normativity. It's better or worseness. Okay? So, okay. So I may have lost you already, or you may have already lost me. Maybe you really are a rev. But you get to my next great point when you say this. So you say physics by no means precedes sentience. We disagree, darling. We disagree fundamentally. But I think I can give you a reason why that's interesting, if you're interested. I'll give you an illustration, though, of why it might not be. I happen to be neighbors here in Berkeley with one of the foremost experts uh, what was it? It was like he's a PhD religious studies or something like that. He had written one of the grand textbooks on this. He died a few years back. His name will come back to me in a minute. And he and I met at a block party, and I revered him. I thought he was an important person. I had read his books and found him interesting. Old guy by the time I met him. And I proposed that we get together for lunch, and we did. And during lunch, I told him this was 30 years ago. I had a concept I was playing with. I called conviction impairment, and I said that that's a problem we're having in modern society, and it very much relates to your question about morality. That's a religious guy, and I said that it's harder now that we all are communicating with each other across the world, because if you have convictions, they might conflict with someone else's convictions. It's more in your face now than it was when tribes lived more homogeneously. That is when we didn't have as much communication or interaction or melting pot. A few months later, a friend said, "Hey, he quoted you in a book that he's just written." And I said, "Oh, that's exciting." And I looked it up, and sure enough, he had used me as a poster child for what's wrong with um, uh, uh, modern society, modern secular society. He said, I keep on looking down. I keep on looking at the text. I'll look at the camera. Um, and he he'd used me as a poster child for what's wrong. He said that I had come to him complaining about how I was suffering from conviction impairment. And I thought, what the fuck? You misquote me deliberately like that. So we got together for lunch again, the two of us and a buddy of mine who was also a major fan of his. Uh, his name's going to come back to me any second now. I should have looked this up maybe. Yeah, written the big textbooks on basically surveys of religion and how religion is important and all that. And over lunch this time, I asked him the question that you and I disagree about here. I said, which comes first, mattering or matter? And he said, well, mattering comes first. And I said, no, I think matter comes first. You get 10 billions of years of history, and for the first 10 billion, we don't see anything that matters to anything here in this neck of the woods. It could be elsewhere, but it seems kind of obvious to me in my sequidisciplinary approach. This is not a cross-disciplinary or multidisciplinary, sequidisciplinary. We look at what happens first and then what happens later, and we try to explain how change changes, such that there's a kind of change that I can perpetrate versus the kind of change that you get from chemistry that isn't trying to stay alive. Um, so we went rounds on which came first. I said, "What's your evidence that mattering came first?" And believe it or not, now I can give the guy some credit because he's a little older by this time, but it's still a silly argument. He said, "Because I went to the library and I looked up Plato's Republic, and I opened the book, and it opened right to the page about Plato's cave." And I said, "That's your explanation for why mattering came first?" which is what you're talking about as just so be clear on the sentience coming first would be what it is. What is sentience? It's that's a longer conversation. I won't go there yet. And I said, okay, well, all right, we've been arguing about this for a while. Can we talk about why two grown men would be debating this with as much fierceness, that is, such intensity, you and me? He said, no. And I said, why not? And he said, because that would imply the possibility that I am motivated to think that mattering comes first. And I just thought it was darling. It was just so perfect. It was so perfect. So, okay, you think mattering comes first, and that's another topic I want to get to. I coined a new acronym this week because of conversations I was having. It's going to come out as a video soon. SPEC, SPEC, Symbolic Pseudoefficient Cause. This is not one of my street words. This is a technical term I want to talk about. So in physics, things push and pull on each other. It's what Aristotle called efficient cause and effect, basically. This physical object bumps into that physical object and changes it. Well, I'm going to argue that whether you're in religion or in science, you're still stuck using symbolic pseudo-efficient cause. If I say that an idea has an impact on me, I'm talking about an idea, a concept, a symbolic concept. That is, I'm using symbols to generate an idea. I'm talking or I'm writing or something like that. And I talk about it as if it is a billiard ball or a magnet interacting with something else. It's been a great liberation for me that I have been weeding that shit out of what I read. Because here's the problem. About 30 years ago, I resolved to read everything in biophilosophy, everything about what the actual fuck we are, and all the speculations. And at first I was thrilled because everybody I read made me feel like a genius because they had these models for how we interacted. And then it got to be too much. There were too many books and I was kind of overwhelmed, and I need a standard for weeding out which is a more credible theory than which. And I was finding that there wasn't much of that. Anybody could make up a theory. And then I encountered my research colleague of the last 30 years and started to see the problem, or you could say the advantage of that kind of work. Whether you do it in religion or you do it in philosophy or you do it in science, it's all got the problem of symbols being treated like billiard balls and magnets. This is symbolic. We are the symbolic species, and I can explain that if anybody's interested in that. But we're the ones that use language and concepts. And I will come back around to your first question because of this. This is Walt's question. Why they use morality over something else? We're a symbolic species. We work in symbols, and so I've got this paradoxical challenge that I'm up against. Which is I am using symbols to explain the chemical, physical emergence of organisms and of organisms and then ultimately symbolic species. So I'm using symbolic language to understand the physical work and how it changed such that there's someone here who's using symbols. So it's got some of the eating your own mouth problem, And what I'm saying is that most of us, quite intuitively, all day long, all of us, me included, use symbols like they're magnets or billiard balls. And so if you do that, and if you start from something like Reverend Walt is proposing here, which is that sentience comes first. Well, sentience is this concept. So you're going to say that sentience causes the physical world. You're with the theologian I was having lunch with twice. Um, you're with him. Mattering comes before matter. Um, there was no matter before there was mattering. Um, One way or another, if you do that, yeah, you've made your task really simple. You've smuggled your conclusion uh, into your uh, into your research. It's like saying, well, yeah. So when we do that, when we start with a symbolic concept, and I would argue math even fits in here. That math, those are all symbols. And then people will do this thing where they'll say, well, okay, the universe is all math. No, it's not. The universe is material objects bumping into each other that we can model symbolically with math or with computation or with description. And I'm saying, no, that's a different challenge that's different. What I'm trying to do is different from that. What me and Terry Deacon and the rest of us researchers are trying to do is different from that. I don't get to just pull out my butt a concept like sentience, say that it starts with sentience, any more than I can say, well, God started it all. I have to actually explain how mattering emerged from matter. And anybody who's not interested is, so there are people who say, well, no, obviously, mattering came first. That's fine. Go find a different table and talk about how mattering came first, how sentience came first. That's fine. There's a different conversation. There are also people they call Mysterians who say it's unknowable. Fine, go do something else. Over here, the conversation I'm having is how mattering emerged from matter. Okay, so yeah, so I want to get to that. Now, in the meantime, if you think normativity comes first, if you think sentience, wanting things. So I should make this clear. I do not make a distinction between religious and spiritual approaches. They both have the same issue going on. The question for me is whether you think the universe or something above it or parallel to it or outside it wants anything. If you think it wants something, it doesn't matter whether you think it's got a white beard or doesn't have a white beard. You're basically operating on that, and then I can come straight to your question. Wonder why they use that over something else. The advantages you reverends get by calling yourself reverends, and by thinking that mattering comes first, is exactly the thing you're wondering about, which is why would people find it advantageous to think that the universe, the moral universe, is on their side? I think the question answers itself. I see that. I deal, part of the time I am doing strategic consulting to couples. And one of the main things I tell them early on is demoralize. Strip the morality off of what you are, strip your moralizing. What is moralizing? Is what you're saying a cult does. It's where they basically say the universe is on my side, or something higher than the universe is on my side. And I don't think that has helped humankind much at all. It has given humans enormous comfort, but it's not good for our survival, for us all to be out there talking like like we have this imaginable ally, um, and that he's on our side. I don't think it's helping because you want to know why? Because the physical world is unimpressed by it. It doesn't give a shit whether you think that you are aligned with some imaginary sentience superior to all of matter. Supernatural. That is, it's outside of nature and it's also above it and it's also on my side. Oh, you guys can hear me, right? Uh-oh. I just saw, hi Kyle, I think your mic isn't on. It's coming through. Oh, is that true? Okay, shit. Let me see if I can figure this out. Sorry. Oh my God. Hello. Oh my God. Let me see if I can figure this out. Oh my gosh. What could it possibly be coming from? It's just very muffled. You're right, it's very muffled. I can see that now. Let me see. That's not helping. It doesn't change it. You're right, I'm not coming through my mic. Why not? I would have known this had I put in. That's terrible. I made this mistake before. Let me see.